Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Stories program. On the program today, a very exciting guest, Bekee Hotzee from the National Forest Service. We're going to be talking about the health of our forests here in Utah. It's what I consider our greatest asset living in Utah, how we protect it, how we preserve it, how we sustain it, all the important issues regarding our forests. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about our Maiden Utah Festival coming up at the Gateway. It's going to be awesome. We have a whole bunch of amazing Utah vendors, all products made in Utah, coming out the first 3 weekends of December. We'll have breweries and distilleries, and we'll have live bands, and you'll actually be able to shop, enjoy a craft cocktail beer, or a craft cocktail or a beer, and listen to live music. It's like a totally out of the Utah body experience because you're experiencing the best of local Utah all in one place. And these have become a hit with us because we really maintain the integrity and the quality of our vendors. We really go all over Utah looking for the very best makers in the entire state, whether it's cheese or leather or photography or handcrafted goods. And we find them, we bring them, and they usually do awesome. Most of them sell out. So that's all thanks to you coming out to the festival and supporting it. For more information on that, go visit madeinutahfest.com, and you can get all the details. The Utah Stories Show is brought to you in part by Curry Pizza, who has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. Guy Fieri recently learned about Curry Pizza and featured them on his show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Check out the episode, but more importantly, check out and try Curry Pizza. It is truly awesome. We have it here at the office a lot, and it's really great. The Utah Stories Show is also brought to you in part by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you're getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to your mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing is a community of academic support, peer mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, and to apply, go visit usu.edu/housing. It's like I went to a commuter school going to the University of Utah. I commuted every day. And to have a real campus environment in Utah, I think, is worth checking out. So go check out usu.edu. This show is also brought to you by Legends. Legends Pub and Grill is locally owned and serves fresh, wholesome, delicious ingredients. Legends features steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones. Plus, they offer gluten-free and vegetarian options. Legends also features 30-plus craft and local beers. Legends accommodates all ages. And now there are 2 locations to serve you, downtown at 677 South, 200 West, and at Southtown at 10631 South, Holiday Park Drive, Sandy, Utah. All right, before we get to the program, I want to thank all of our new subscribers to the YouTube channel. I really kind of thought when we launched the podcast, it would be iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all the major podcasting platforms where we'd see the growth, but it's actually been YouTube. So we're the only live streaming podcast that I know of in Utah. We decided to just take the plunge and do everything live, and I think it's been interesting. It's like obviously we make mistakes all the time, but we've kind of begun to get it dialed in, thanks to Tyler and Connie, and it's looking good. So we got 280 new subscribers. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you're watching the program. And if you are, and if you came from one of our other videos, you probably noticed in our other videos, we like delving into topics in greater depth than the media offers. We like to ask really tough, difficult, more profound questions regarding whatever we cover, whether it's the environment or politics or air quality or health and wellness or dogs or careers or living a more self-reliant lifestyle. We want to get into it in depth, and that's kind of what you're going to find here at the Utah Stories Show. All right, so with me on the program today is, again, Bekee Hotzee. Thanks for being on, Bekee.
Thank you for having me.
So I think, first of all, what do you think is the number one thing everybody really needs to know about our forests and protecting and preserving them that you see that would be the number one best way we could have sustainable long-term quality of forests in Utah?
Number one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can narrow it down to just
Or maybe the
one
top
thing.
3.
Top 8. So, geez, we have an impact on the forest, right? And depending upon where you're at, you're going to have a different type of impact. Here along the Wasatch Front, recreation is our number one impact. So mountain biking, hiking, all those kinds of things. Staying on trails is really good. The leave no trace principles need to apply. So, just watch what you're doing when you're out there. Forest health is a huge concern right now with the bugs and the non-native insects that are impacting our trees. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we can talk about a little bit more if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't bring things from one place to the other because we have problems with invasive species. So when people are bringing something that looks cool from one place to another, don't bring it to the forest.
What would you get? Can you give an example of that?
I was just hiking up Neff's Canyon, and somebody decided to have a little monument in recognition of something that somebody, some person, some dog that they lost. And so they planted a tree, which sounds great, except the tree doesn't belong where they planted it. So it's not the right type of species for where they planted it. So they had good intentions of bringing something in. However, it could have real consequences because it doesn't fit in with what's there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cheatgrass is another in the desert, right? Mm-hmm. So cheatgrass is originally brought over here as fodder, as food for our cows. Mm-hmm. Cheatgrass no longer is considered really good food in the spring when it first comes up. Cows will eat it, but once it starts drying out, cows don't like to eat it. And now we have cheatgrass throughout the whole West Desert. And that was something that we brought over. I mean, I can go on and on.
There are so many examples of that. The
myrtle spurge.
Yeah, that's the one I always see National Forest folks up in Mill Creek trying to eradicate. Has that been a huge, tough battle? Just the myrtle spurge?
The spurge. Yeah, you can still buy it at Home Depot right now. And It spreads pretty rampantly, especially in areas that are dry. That's why people like to plant it in their yards, because it can grow without water. But because it can also grow without water, it also spreads pretty easily up onto the forest. But
would you recommend everybody just take it out of their yards even completely?
Yes.
Really?
And if they want to pick up 500 pounds of it off the forest, come let me know.
Yeah, man, it is disconcerting to see that, because an invasive species like myrtle spurge, does it basically just drown out or suffocate the other species? Is that why it's so bad?
Yeah, and a lot of non-natives. I mean, zebra mussels the same way. And the division has been trying to eradicate that, but right now they're just trying to stop the spread. It drowns out the native plants or native mussels for zebra mussel, the myrtle spurge, the native plants. So
is that a big part of your job, just working on getting rid of those non-native species?
Not as much as it should be. We do have some volunteers, and I do have a botanist that tries to get many together. Unfortunately, we just don't have the capacity to be able to deal with the amount of invasive species that we currently have. Yeah.
I was looking at the box elder trees along Jordan River. Are those native?
Jordan River. So my area that I manage is the Forest Service land, which is on the east side
that's out of here.
Of the valley here. And I go from Lone Peak up to Weber Canyon. And then I also manage the Stansberries. So the Jordan River corridor is outside of my realm.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that because there's tons of them. And I notice I've been running a lot there with my dogs, but I run a lot in Mill Creek too. Are there other trees that are invasive species in Mill Creek that are affecting the ecology up there?
Not trees, but we do have Russian olive in the valley, and we have tamarisk. And those two species definitely displace, the tamarisk displaces trees along wet areas, like wetlands and things like that. They displace the willows, or the Russian olives just kind of take over the fields.
Yeah. Yeah, and I noticed, I've noticed something, and I used to camp a lot and go backpacking a lot in the Uintas, And it seems like those trees in the Uintas, the big pine trees, are not looking too great. Is that a bug or a parasite, or what's causing that?
Yeah, so that's also not my area, but I did ask the our forest pathologist about what was going on out there, and what's affecting those is the mountain pine beetle, which impacts your lodgepole pine. And what we're having here along the front, because you'll notice as you go up the canyons, you'll see a lot of subalpine fir that are dying. We have a little bug called this balsam woolly adelgid, BWA.
Wow.
And that bug is not native. So a lot of our trees, the spruce, the pine, those are impacted by bark beetles, which are native. And they impact the trees when they reach a certain diameter, because that's when the tree is big enough for the beetles to actually live underneath the bark, feeding off that xylem and phloem layers, those layers that bring the nutrients from the leaves to the roots and the water from the roots up to the leaves. The beetles really kind of concentrate on those areas, so the tree needs to be a certain size for it to really take hold.
Okay.
So you'll notice some of our older spruce and pine are dying from that, but the subalpine fir, this BWA, balsam woolly adelgid, is killing about 40 to 70% of all subalpine fir, regardless of age. Wow. So from the really small baby trees all the way up to the old growth subalpine fir. If you have old growth subalpine fir, they only live to be 80 to 100 years. So you don't really have old growth, but for the tree, that's old.
Yeah.
So about 40 to 70% of all of those trees are dying right now.
Jeez. And I guess there's not much you can do about it, right?
So it is non-native. There is some things that if you have like a desired tree that you want to keep, you can spray. But for the forest, that's not something that is economical, nor is it something that we can do in these canyons that provide water. What we do have in the canyons, which is to our advantage, is that we have a variety of species. So subalpine fir doesn't make up 100% of the forest like you have up in the high Uintas, where you have 100% of spruce that are now dying from spruce beetle, or in this case, the lodgepole pine that are dying from the mountain pine beetle. Here, we have spruce, we have pine, we have Doug fir, white fir, lodgepole pine, although not much lodgepole pine, just a couple that were planted, and then we have limber pine. So we have that variety of species. We have a variety of ages. So even when you look at all the subalpine fir coming out, you'll notice that some of the other trees will come back.
Okay, because the ecology of the forest up here in Mill Creek, and I guess the Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons are the same. Mm-hmm. You'll have more biodiversity and more resilience to that beetle and
the balsam woolly adelgid.
Balsam woolly adelgid.
That's why we use BWA, because it's really like a mouthful.
Balsam woolly.
And where does
that guy come from?
Germany. Huh. And it's like the stars are aligning for this bug. It's 0.2 millimeters big, so it's a teeny tiny little bug.
Jeez.
And it's wind dispersed, so it doesn't really need legs to move. It reproduces asexually, so every single bug that we have here in the States is female. Don't even need to find a mate, right?
Wow.
What are some of the other? I already said it affects all of the trees. High mortality. There's some other things in there that it's like the stars are aligning for this bug so that it can.
And really so what's the long-term outlook if 40 to 70% of all the trees in the Uintas are going to die? Can you plant or have a call out to plant more trees, or?
So we want to clarify, not 40 to 70% of all trees. It's only 40 to 70% of the subalpine fir.
Yeah, sorry.
And so we do have that nice mixture of trees here. Mm-hmm. And, maybe going back a couple hundred years, or at least into the 1850s when we were first settled by pioneers here, they started deforesting the forest, they started mining the canyons, and they started grazing up in the forest. So at the turn of the century, people were actually getting sick drinking the water that was coming out of these canyons. So the governor of Utah at the time called the federal government and said, "Can you please come help? We don't know why we're getting sick." So they sent Gifford Pinchot, who is our first Forest Service chief, to come out here. He rode his horse up and down the canyons and came back and made a couple recommendations. No grazing, reduce mining, eliminate mining, and then reforest the forest. And so they worked together, the federal government and the state worked together between 1905 and 1920 to replant all of the trees that you see today. They used spruces, which is now a campground. They used that as a nursery back then to grow millions of trees that they then planted the Wasatch Front. And luckily, they chose a variety of species so that when you have that variety of species, you get that resiliency in the forest. So if you do have a bug come through, like the spruce beetle, it's only going to take out spruce of that certain size diameter. It's not going to take out everything. And so the subalpine fir, they didn't plant. That just came back naturally. But it's the same thing. We have that nice mixture of trees that the subalpine fir is not going to, even if that was all gone, we're still going to have trees. And I'm going to point to Spruce's campground. I've been working with, I want to say, everybody in my forest. We have a fuels group, we have fire folks, we have our rec people. We all got together and started working in spruces last fall. We noticed a lot of mortality up there caused by BWA and spent maybe about $50,000 up there removing the diseased and impacted dead subalpine fir. And if you go there today, it looks like a really healthy stand of forest, and you wouldn't know that we spent that much time and that much effort removing those dead trees.
Oh, that's awesome. And so why that, what made you guys decide to pick that particular area?
So when we do extensive management, we focus on areas that we have infrastructure. And so our campgrounds are the first place that we go to. We don't tend to do that level of management in general forested areas. So, you know, out in the middle of Mill Creek Canyon when you're not around a trail, we tend not to do that kind of that work just because it is expensive and high.
You use chainsaws and things like that? Or
Depends upon where we're at. We do have 4 wilderness areas on my district and 3 along the frontier. So if you're in wilderness, then we don't allow mechanized equipment like chainsaws.
Oh, yeah.
So everything's the crosscut
Wow.
saw.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I have some really beefy trails people.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, like, what all these people going to gyms. Like, if you could go recruit a bunch of those guys and go up to Mill Creek, there are so many dead trees, just like dead wood everywhere in Mill Creek. And it seems like they, and this is just my perception, but it seems like if they took out all of the dead rotting trees, not the ones that are all, you know, rotting all the way, but that have just been sitting there for years, could they plant a bunch more new trees in the place of those ones that have died? And I mean, would money make a difference in that regard and manpower?
So you brought up like 8 different topics that we can talk about. So the dead material from the dead trees actually provides benefit to the soils. It brings in microbes and bugs and stuff like that we actually want to have in the soils because it makes the soils healthier. If we remove all the dead stuff, then we remove that microbe.
Yeah, and I know those ones are great, but there's a lot of trees that are not decomposing that are just like somebody built a fort out of all the trees on the in the Thames Canyon area where I go a lot, and they just dispersed all that wood recently, I noticed.
Yeah, I had an Eagle Scout up there that helped disperse all of that and put it back to a natural state.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
I've had a couple of Eagle Scouts. Yeah.
Project. Yeah, because I was like, okay, that's a little ridiculous. Somebody built a fort out of all that wood.
Yeah.
But I thought if they brought up a wood chipper or something like that, then they could at least decompose it. But it just seems to be just sitting there.
Yeah, wood chips are difficult as well because they create like a layer that's really difficult. If you do get a fire in there, it's difficult for our firefighters to put a line in there to stop the fire. Whereas if you have slash, which is what it is, they can easily go around it. But the wood chips are hard to dig a line.
Yeah, you're totally like knocking all my great ideas.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's like, why don't we do this? Why don't we? Yeah, it makes sense though. If you had a fire, how would you stop it?
So there are some things that I have opened up to residents that live in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon, and then also we have recreation residents in Mill Creek that they can come into our office and get a permit, and that will allow them to cut trees within, so much of a diameter at breast height is what it's called, DBH,
Oh,
because we
that's
use
cool.
acronyms everywhere. So if the tree is smaller, then they can cut those down, and then if the tree is dead, they can also remove that. So that would at least provide their residents some protection.
Oh, that's cool. So that's for big and little cottonwood only? You can
And
do
Mill
that?
Creek,
Oh, in Mill
the
Creek?
rec residents in Mill Creek.
Oh, so if you have a cabin up there, basically.
Yeah,
Oh,
you would
okay.
need to have a cabin. You'd have to have some structure that you're providing protection for.
Yeah. Yeah, we recently went past the cabins in Mill Creek, and that would be an amazing place to have a cabin. Those probably don't go for sale very often.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Occasionally, there was one that was sold just like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So
So as far as your job goes, what's your day-to-day routine look like?
I don't have a routine.
Not
So
at all.
No, I think I'm going to do something, and I totally don't do anything that I think I'm going to do.
It's
So
totally different every day.
it's completely different. It actually is very rewarding because of the diversity that we get to work with. We have geologists, biologists, botanists, plant pathologists, fuels folks, ecologists. Recreation is huge. So we have a lot of people on my district that work specifically in recreation, trails, bathrooms. I've talked about bathrooms more in the last 4 years than I've talked about my entire life. Graffiti is a huge concern. So we have a graffiti group that I work with. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely different every single day.
Wow. Yeah, one of the things I brought up is I took my dogs to Dog Lake. All along there's aspens, and I noticed the aspens seem to be dying, and people love carving their names in the aspen. I don't know if the two are related, but do you know why those trees are dying there?
So, talking to my forest pathologist, there's canker diseases, insect borers, and there's an aspen leaf blight, but those are causing mortality, like smaller number of trees are dying. If you're seeing a lot of trees die, that's drought related. But what you're talking about with people carving their initials, when I was talking before about the pine with the phloem and the xylem layer that's just below the bark and before the hardwood part of the tree, aspen have the exact same thing. So when you're carving your initials in it, you're stopping the ability of that tree to be able to get the nutrients in the water up and down where it needs to go so that the tree can survive and be healthy. And if you end up going all the way around the tree, that's called girdling, and you in effect kill the tree by doing something like that.
Okay. So it definitely messes up the tree.
Yeah, and it also creates a point that disease and insects can enter the tree because it weakens the tree.
Okay.
It's like you cutting your hand and then getting an infection.
Is there a law against doing that?
There is natural resource damages, but it's not something that
You can enforce, I'm sure.
right.
Yeah.
Right. People don't tend to do that kind of activity when we're around.
Yeah.
Right. They put the pocket knife back in their pocket.
Yeah. Well, I've never seen anybody do it, but it just, man, it makes my blood boil. Like I just I'll see some new name in there, and I'm just like, you're just screwing up your ability to enjoy this place. Like, do you want your kids to not have as nice of an experience as you're having? And so it's it makes you mad, but what can you do? I guess it's one of those things.
Well, you could volunteer for the Salt Lake Ranger District. So our
Really?
district, we hosted over 2,400 volunteers last year, providing over 15,000 hours of service.
Cool.
That was, I can't remember the dollar figure, but it was almost $200,000 worth of service that people provided to the Salt Lake Ranger District. We have by far the largest volunteer program than any other forest.
Yeah,
across the
I
country.
would sign up for that for sure.
We have about 23 different volunteer organizations that we work with. So depending upon what your area of interest is, we have people that help with climbing and climbing routes and providing access for the climbers. We have people that do a lot of cleanups, litter cleanups in some of our sites. Graffiti removal, as I mentioned before, is a huge one because it's the same thing that you were talking about when you see people writing their names on trees. People
What's
feel
most of the
same way.
graffiti you see then?
Where's what?
What kind of graffiti do you see mostly?
So there's 3 different kinds. One is the artists, one is the like students that just go up there and have nothing to do. And then the third kind,
Like
which
painting
is,
on rocks and stuff, or?
Yeah, like scribbling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's spray paint.
Oh, really?
And then the last one, which is the most worrisome, is the gang-related graffiti that we have going on up there.
In national forests?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I haven't seen that. I guess, where do you see stuff like that?
I don't want to say because I don't want people to be attracted to those
okay.
areas. But I do have a pretty active group. We call them the Graffiti Abatement Focus Group. And they have been really successful in the last couple of years getting legislation changed or passed to increase fines and time that you have to serve if you are caught doing graffiti in natural lands. And then another one is having money set aside from Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant so that people can go in and, apply for the grants and get money to buy the chemicals that they need to get rid of the graffiti. Our graffiti group, the volunteers, are spending their own money right now, which is thousands of dollars for some of them to purchase the supplies that they need to get up there and clean. But they are so dedicated. They're up there all the time, cleaning as quickly as they can when they see it.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the most obvious place, and I'm sure most people know about it already, Suicide Rock. It just seems like it's gone crazy with graffiti. Every rock around there is painted now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, come on.
Luckily, that's not mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of when people say, can't you give them a sacrifice area? That's the problem when you have a sacrifice area.
Yeah.
It just keeps spreading.
It's spread to the other. You can see there's the big ravine area, and up on the other opposite hillside, there's people painting up there too. And
right.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. But man, they pulled out. There was a recent news story. They pulled out like a few thousand pounds of propane tanks and tents and camping gear, and all these people were living down there.
Wow.
Is that a problem you deal with at the Forest Service and National Forest, where people actually will go up there and live? And try to camp?
Definitely. Little Cottonwood Canyon, a couple years ago, we had a lot of people living up there. That was when graffiti was at its worst. I do have a graffiti fact sheet, so I don't know if you have an ability to put this on your website, but you can see
we could link to,
what it used to look like. No, of course we don't have. I can send it to you. We don't have it.
Scan it and turn it into a PDF or something.
So I can email that to you too. But a couple years ago, when the graffiti group was formed, there was an area called the Pavilion, which we've now dismantled and reclaimed. And with that, the graffiti and cleaning it and changing the laws and more enforcement and better education, we've slowly been able to clean up the area so that it looks more like a national forest again, instead of looking like a...
That was terrible.
Yeah, sorry for those of you.
Let's see if I can show this. Can you show this?
Zoom in. They've just done...
That's, I think you can see the before and after, can't you? Oh, yeah. Can you see that? And then this was a structure up Little Cottonwood?
Yeah, that was called the Pavilion.
Pavilion?
Yeah. And so at that time when the graffiti group was starting, we had a lot of problems with people living in that canyon. There was drug needles, human waste. This is our watershed, right? The
drug needles?
Hypodermic needles, like drug
needles.
Use.
Yeah, needles.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And then the alcohol, broken bottles, empty bottles everywhere. Again, human waste. These are our watersheds. This is why this forest was created in 1905, was to provide protection for the watershed, for the drinking water for people. Again, when I was talking about the history of this district, that was why we started. People were getting sick drinking our water, so the forest came in, replanted trees, and now with that type of activity, we're at danger of having that same problem again.
Yeah.
So we clean up graffiti. We've been cleaning up the fire rings. We've been cleaning up the needles and the other drug paraphernalia. There were animal sacrifices that were going on up there. I mean, it wasn't a good area.
Yeah.
But now the graffiti group is estimating anywhere between 60 to 90% clean in that area. And like I said, they go out there every weekend and as many times as they can to just make sure that it's
just
clean.
a volunteer group going up there?
And it's just a volunteer group.
God,
yeah.
That's amazing.
They are phenomenal.
Man, we need to highlight these people. And we're having our mountain issue in December of Utah Stories, where we're talking about like people who are helping save our canyons and our environment. So I'll have to get some contacts from you.
Absolutely. I have 23 organizations you can choose from.
Nice. Is Tree Utah one of those?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Yeah. So it's, I heard that we could actually maybe not curtail curtail climate change if we planted like 4 billion trees. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I think what you had on here is like 600 million, and it's scope and scale, right? So we can't plant all those trees here. And when I'm managing my forest, I actually look at my land management plan. It gives me guidance for how the forest should be maintained and what it should look like. So we have a desired future condition. And right now, we have a high density of trees. We're not meeting that desired future condition because we have too many trees in these canyons.
Oh, really? Huh. So there's a particular ideal density that's good for what, the ecology, wildlife, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and the areas that we were talking about before with the dying trees, when you have that many trees together, you have high fuel. So if you do get a fire in there, it's going to burn pretty quickly, and it's going to burn really hot. And so when we get a fire in there, if it's burning really hot and it burns the soils hot, it could actually sterilize the soils. So we want to make sure that we're leaving some space between some trees and not overcrowding the trees.
I know that's been a controversial issue, and with the wildfires that have been burning in California, they're trying to adopt the best policy for when the fires just absolutely aren't contained. What's the consensus these days? Should you are they letting a lot of fires just burn now because they will burn so much more hot if they let them grow so long without and keep containing the fires? What is there a consensus about what to do when there's forest fires?
Some of the terminology is, I think, confusing because as experts in the field, we tend to use jargon, which isn't relatively or understood very well by people. We don't let things burn. We do manage fires. So even if the fire isn't being suppressed fully, meaning people aren't engaging in it, doesn't mean that we're letting it burn. It means that we're managing it either to meet management objectives, like getting rid of some of the dead and dying trees in an area. But we have I don't want to call it, see, here's another jargon, catcher's mitt. We know where we want it to end. We know we have a plan for where that fire is going to go to.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times we'll actually go there beforehand, build a line, and then burn in. And if you looked at the gun range fire at all, that was a perfect example of that. That was the one that was in Bountiful that burnt down 3 homes this year.
Oh, yeah.
When we were managing it, we had 50-mile-an-hour gusts. We can't put firefighters out in the middle of that because it's just too dangerous for them. So we went to an area that was safer for them to fight the fire and be successful at it. They cut a line through some grass and then just burnt back. And then when they burnt back, they just burnt, when I'm saying burnt back, they burnt into the burning area so that the two fires met each other.
Yeah.
And they were really successful at doing that. And we used the Bountiful Shoreline Trail on almost every fire along the front this year that had the Bountiful Shoreline Trail. We used that as a fire break along the bottom so that the fire didn't come into the homes.
Wow. So that was a managed burn, that Bountiful one.
Well, they're all wildfires and they're classified as wildfires. It's just how we manage the suppression.
Oh, so you didn't start the fire.
Well,
and you guys
people start the fire. So about 70% of all fires are started by people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, when you say what one
but the
thing
Forest
do I
Service
want
isn't going
to
to start
control?
the Forest Service, or do they ever start fires intentionally to
Yes, we do.
manage burns? And
Yeah, so we do prescribe burning as well. I haven't done any in my district. Along the Wasatch Front, it is a little bit heavily populated for something like that. But Heber Camas just did one a couple weeks ago.
Huh. And I'm sure they let the public know they're going to do that. And
Yeah.
so going back to Bountiful, was that fire a managed burn by the Forest Service, or was it started by
It was
arson?
started by 2 people. Not an arson. 2 people were having a campfire. And it got really windy with our evening down gusts down the mountain, and it just took the fire and spread it down. And within a couple minutes and I have to go back to the record, but it seemed like it was within 10 minutes, it was already at the back door of people's homes.
Jeez.
So it was very fast moving fire.
And with the fires that are so bad in California right now, is it just the ongoing drought and the conditions there that are making those fires so bad and so uncontrollable?
I can't speak to California fires.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's like every year now, it seems like California has just thousands of acres burning. And I suppose it's probably drought, but.
So if we go to the front here, we can look at the fire return interval and Gamble Oak and the other trees at higher elevations. And our fire return interval along the front is not far apart. So the Gamble Oak, it burns, it comes back, it burns again, it comes back. The problem is when you start getting homes mixed in with the Gamble Oak, because Gamble Oak burns every couple of years. Mm-hmm. If the Gamble Oak converts to cheatgrass, as we mentioned earlier, cheatgrass is going higher and higher in elevation every year. If it converts to cheatgrass and you're looking at the fire burning every year or every other year. So you have to look at the fire return interval as well and where people are choosing to put their homes. So for us, I think the biggest hurdle that we need to manage is defensible space around people's homes. Make sure that they don't have trees going right up to their house, especially dead trees, and then maintaining that defensible space. Okay,
that's interesting. Another thing I'm interested in is as the resorts want to do more and more development, obviously, the biggest controversial element that the resorts would really love to have is the interconnect, the access between connecting resorts up, and Ski Link has been voted down many times. Do you guys ever weigh in on that decision and take a stance, why that might not be such a great idea?
So my job is to balance the multiple uses that we have in the canyons. We don't take positions on things like that. And as of now, I don't have any proposals to do anything.
Yeah, it's kind of good. I saw it was first called Ski Link, right, and then they tried rebranding it to, I think they called it Interconnect or something like that. But it was like the same campaign to stop it that I saw all over my neighborhood, which I was happy to see. That because it's like we had Carl Fisher on the program from Save Our Canyons, and he talked about how unique the Wasatch Range is, because it's actually not very large when you compare it to the Alps of Europe, for example. If you look at the French Alps, there's a massive expanse of wilderness area, and when you compare it to the Wasatch Range and the Wasatch Back, if you're thinking, oh well, it's just a little corridor, they want to build a gondola, well, no big deal. But really that would have a pretty profound impact on the entire ecology and everything that's back there, wouldn't it?
So when you're moving people up to the ski areas have infrastructure, at least. So they have the bathrooms to provide support to those people. If you're moving people like a shuttle or a bus to one of my sites, for instance, I don't have that infrastructure to support that number of people. So I think it depends upon where on the landscape people go and then how that can be managed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's if they have to build access roads to bail people off of gondolas, obviously those access roads are going to be built through pristine wilderness, and that's not going to be too great.
Roads can't be built in wilderness.
Really? So yeah. They'd have to designate it non-wilderness? Is that how they'd...
So there's strips of land that are in between the wilderness areas. Our wilderness areas are all along the front. So when you get to the ski areas, those aren't wilderness. Those are designated as developed recreation sites within my land management plan.
Oh, okay. So if you're talking about Little Cottonwood, everything inside a snowbird is considered development recreational land. Is that right?
Yeah, it's set aside for the ski area.
Okay. And maybe white pine and red pine, those areas are those wilderness areas?
That one, no, it's not wilderness.
Oh, still not wilderness.
It's not wilderness. So the wilderness is downslope of the white pine area. We have a hella skiing permit, and they're able to drop off there.
Huh.
So that's not something that's wilderness. So you also can't have helicopters land in wilderness either.
Okay. Well, I'm learning something new. Yeah, I thought that, so even though that's the Ashley-Cache National Forest.
Uinta-Cache National.
Oh, Uinta-Cache is Little Cottonwood?
Uinta-Wasatch-Cache.
Uinta-Wasatch-Cache.
Yeah, so we used to be 3 forests, and now administratively we're managed as 1.
Okay, so those are all under one umbrella.
Yeah, so my district is what used to be part of the Wasatch National Forest, and now it's the Uinta-Wasatch-Cache.
Okay, and that's the one entity controlling that area.
Well, I don't know if we can say one entity controlling the area.
Well, one national forest entity controlling that area.
And again, controlling.
Not controlling, protecting.
Overseeing the management of.
There you go.
When we were created in 1905, Congress actually gave authority to Salt Lake City to also manage the canyons for watershed.
Yeah, the water. So I think Carl explained this. The entities that are managing the canyons, the nature, the wildlife, the watershed, there's a lot of entities involved, including the county and the watershed. Is it watershed district or something like that?
So Salt Lake City Public Utilities does the water quality because they're the ones that distribute the water to Salt Lake Valley residents.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, when the pioneers arrived and they obviously had to build a lot of log cabins, they built their they went into the forest and they basically logged all the trees down, and there were no more trees eventually. And then they were also getting their granite for the temple and for a lot of the stuff they were building down in the Salt Lake Valley. So was that water super highly contaminated? Was it just totally undrinkable at that point?
There was a lot of erosion that was coming down because there were no trees to hold the soils back.
Oh,
So
wow.
every time it rained, there was more avalanches in the snow. In the winter, there were more mudslides. Oh, that's okay. There were mudslides. There was just a lot of sheet erosion. So there was a lot of turbidity and a lot of sedimentation causing people to get sick. And yes, the mining did have some impacts as well. They didn't have tailings, so they didn't actually crush the rock up there, but they do have overburden from where they pulled the rock out.
Okay. And so how long did it take after they first started planting trees that water became safe to drink? And is it our primary source of drinking water now in the Salt Lake Valley?
For those questions, I would refer you to public utilities. I'm not sure when they met water quality standards because we didn't have water quality standards back then. But my understanding is it provides about 60% of the water in the valley. Yeah,
that's amazing. And to think that source wasn't available for so long.
Or it made people sick.
Yeah, or it made people sick. That's quite an achievement that's all now. I mean, you look at it and you would probably never guess it's not old growth, but related to old growth areas, we do still have some old growth forests in Utah. Is that right?
So in my district, so again, the Wasatch Front right here, there's a couple really cool trees that were used as marker trees. So have you ever heard of blazing a trail?
No, I mean...
Never heard of blazing a trail?
Well, I mean, yeah, like trailblazing.
Right, trailblazing.
Yeah.
So that actually came from the old mining era when they would actually mark the trees and they would call them blaze trees so that miners can get from camp to camp or camp to the bar or the bar to Park City. So they have a bunch of blaze trees that are up there, and there's still one blaze tree that's up in Snake Creek if you
Are they literally blazed? Were they or how would they mark them?
So they would cut a chunk out of the tree, out of the bark, and then they would cut another chunk out. So there'd be like 2 circles, a big one to mark that it's a blaze tree, and then a smaller one somewhere above that big circle to tell you where the next blaze tree was. So it was you'd get to one tree, you'd see, oh, you're going to go over there, and then you'd see another blaze over there, and then you'd walk to that tree. And so it would get you from
kind of like an arrow telling you where to go.
So at Brighton Ski Resort, there's one right off of the Snake Creek chairlift. There's one right there, which is really kind of cool. And then there's a couple of other small pockets that were really hard to get to. So those trees were left. And then our limber pine, they didn't like cutting the limber pine because it was really gnarly and not really good for anything. So they just kind of let the limber pine go. And then there's a research natural area up in Big Cottonwood Canyon that was established as a research natural area because of the aspen. Kind of the trees were left alone. They don't show any signs of any impact by humans. So that was established.
Huh, that's way cool. So were the forests when the pioneers first arrived, all, I guess, like they were all old growth? Were they way more? Was there a lot more biodiversity, a lot more variety of the trees than you find now back then?
So the trees that were replanted, a lot of them were native. There were a couple trees that were not native that were planted up here. And so we think we have, except for the not native ones, like the larch that were planted up there and then the ponderosa pine, we think that our forest today looks like what it did back then, with the exception that there was probably more disturbance back then, like fires were a little bit larger. The fires you mentioned a little bit earlier about suppression. The fires historically have been suppressed at the smallest size here. So now we're suppressing them still. So we're still managing a wildfire, but we're suppressing it so that it's not as small as it would be, if that makes sense. I know that sounds horrible. So we're
well, I guess that makes sense. You're suppressing the fire so that it gets to the temperature and to the point where it actually does good, and
not even that. So our first consideration is our firefighter safety and safety of the public. So if the firefighter is going in and suppressing it at the smallest possible size isn't safe, then we're not going to send our firefighters in there. Because at the end of the day, we want everybody to go home, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Burning down trees burn. It's not something that's a huge consideration, but burning down a firefighter is. Yeah. So if we have more success or potential for more success, like what I mentioned before with the gun range fire, where they can cut a line in grass and then burn into the fire and have a higher chance of success, that's what we're going to choose to do.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, the only other thing that I'm really fascinated by, and I don't know how much you can talk about it because it's a ecology, question, is we have all these mushrooms, and I see a lot of them growing, wild in the forest, and I read a lot about how mycelium networks are actually discovered to be a big part of how trees get their nutrients from the soil. Like the mycelium networks actually spread out, and the tree and the mycelium communicate, and the tree can basically I guess probably send off a biochemical signal saying that it needs a certain kind of nutrient. Is that something that you're looking at in terms of looking at the health of the ecology, or are you looking at the variety of the mushrooms that are there and whether or not those networks are healthy and helping the trees grow in the way they should?
So we do have a research branch of the Forest Service that does look at that symbiotic relationship, know whether or not they're communicating and saying, hey, I need more vitamin C. That's something for the researchers to talk about. But I did bring you a paper
cool. Thank
about
you.
the humongous fungus.
Whoa, awesome. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by it. I got into yeast and mycelium like about 20 years ago, and I started studying it, and it's just amazing how these little tiny, they're like one cell thick, and they spread throughout the entire forest and all the ecology, and the bacteria fungi relationship that exists is so properly balanced so that everything can thrive the way it should, and all those organisms exist based on that. But is this research starting to enter into more of what you guys do?
Well, it does impact like the dead and down woody material that we talked about before, and why we want to make sure that we leave some in there. We don't want to pull all the vegetation off the forest floor because we want to make sure that there's some food for those microbes that are down there.
Yeah, and I know if you want to grow mushrooms at home, you got to get a big pile of wood chips, and they're either oak wood chips or some certain kind of tree, because that's what they grow in. And yeah, well, cool. Well, I'll read this paper. Maybe we'll do a story on, we plan on doing a story on mushrooms in the forest sometime soon, so that'll be cool.
Okay, great.
Is there anything else that you think more of the public need to know about basically what they can do to be a bigger part of helping preserve our forests and our quality of life here in Utah?
So the one thing that I'd like to go back to is just leave no trace principles. So there's 7 principles that Leave No Trace has established. The first one is plan ahead and prepare. So know before you go. I know before you go is traditionally used for avalanches, but know if it's raining that your trails are going to be muddy. So you might not want to go mountain biking for a little while because you're going to just cause more erosion. You might not want to go ATVing or 4-wheeling because you're going to cause rutting in those trails. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. So stay on trails. The more people we have going off the trail, the less vegetation we're going to have. And Albion Meadows is a huge area that's impacted by that. Next year, we'll probably be closing that to cross-country travel, so people can't walk across that because we do have to maintain the integrity of that higher wildflower patch right there. We did close the area around Silver Lake this year to cross-country travel, and the response of the vegetation has been phenomenal. It's come back quite strong to be able to actually grow instead of being trampled.
It's amazing what happens when you just close an area. That we saw it at Tanner Park, and I'm sure that's out of your jurisdiction, but they just cordoned off with chain link fence a big area where you used to be able to let your dogs in, and the dogs just totally eroded all of the banks of the Parley's Creek that was coming out of there, and just amazing. I just look in there and I see all of these big trees growing and all this different kinds of plants growing in there. And is it just like, do dogs do a ton of damage to trails? I would guess that they probably do. Right?
Yeah, they do. We talked before about the Eagle Scout projects up in Mill Creek. So a lot of that was to try and get the dogs to stay on the trail instead of run off trail. And I know dogs like to run off trail, right? That's why they're up there. Yeah, so it does cause. 2 of the
guilty members are at your feet right now.
Yeah. And another thing with that, when they're off leash, it's also harder to find where they go to the bathroom. So we have high fecal counts in Mill Creek Canyon because the dog feces are left up there.
Yeah.
And if they are bagged up, a lot of times the bags are left up there, and there aren't poop fairies. It's my employees that are going up there picking up the bags.
Really?
So it'd be great if people can pick that up,
well,
which is another thing. Dispose of waste properly.
Yeah, that's important.
Pack it in, pack it out.
Well, it's just like if you can get your dogs into a routine where you know and they know the first thing that's going to happen is your poop or you're not getting off leash. That's just a really simple measure I think people can take. Like my dogs, they know they'll get off leash if they go poop, and they do. So
yeah. So last January when we had the furlough, I was the only employee working because I'm considered essential for some reason, which I'm not sure why to this day. But I went out there after 3 days of nobody picking up the poop in the canyon, and I came out with 14 55-gallon bags filled with dog poop.
Jeez.
And that was after 3 days.
That's in Mill Creek?
That was in Mill Creek.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So, I mean, even people just aren't bringing it back to the garbage can to begin with. You can see hundreds of bags within the first couple 100 feet of the trail. And it's my employees going out there and picking it up. So people could do that. That would be great.
Yeah.
We talked before about campfires. So knowing what a campfire is It doesn't mean just a fire when you're camping. It also means like if you're having a picnic too, that's considered a campfire. Know where you can and cannot have a fire. I do have a lot of permanent fire restrictions along the front here, 1/2 mile from any road in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons and Mill Creek, unless it's a designated site.
Okay.
So if in doubt, don't do it. And even if you can do it, should you?
Yeah.
Know before you go, are we going to experience high winds? If so, maybe not having a campfire. They do spread pretty quickly, and it's quite expensive to put those out. Fireworks are permanently banned, so know that as well. If you're on Forest Service land, you can't do that. And then fire also has huge impacts on what it looks like in the landscape. There's fire rings everywhere, and people are, the burned vegetation and stuff. So put out your fire. Know how to put out the fire. Water, stir it, more water, and then disperse your campfire ring so it doesn't look like a developed site. Respect wildlife. That one, there's a huge one. My background is biology, and understanding what animals will do and what their temperaments are is really critical. Bears, mothers with their cubs, leave them alone. Give them a wide berth. Moose, same thing. Don't shoot at them.
Yeah.
Walk away. Try and find another way down. Bears also, I think that we're going to face a number of challenges in the next couple of years. People in the canyons here are not used to having bears around, and we do have bears up here.
I noticed a sign at Mill Creek on in Rattlesnake that a bear had been seen. Did do you know the details of that, or is it just?
So I know further up the canyon, that's where the bear was shot at a couple times.
Really?
And it was a mother with her cub. But we have bears going up and down the canyons all the time.
Really?
They have big home ranges, and especially mother with her cubs are trying to feed them. And then males have even bigger home ranges because they have to find the females.
So you found out somebody just shot at some bears up there?
Yeah.
Without a license or hunting license or anything like that?
No, I think they were nervous.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So just knowing what bears, do some research on what bears would do. The most critical thing everybody here can do specific to bears is maintain your food. So keep it on yourself. Don't throw trash down. Put it back in your pocket when you're done eating, because that's how we start having problem bears. They start seeing people as a food source. And so we really don't want them to see people as a food source, because then we have to start putting bears down. Same thing, campgrounds. Don't leave food out overnight. I walk in the campgrounds at 6 o'clock in the morning and tables are full of food. Put the food away. Make sure the bears are safe.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's all good information.
And then the last thing, be considerate of other visitors. You talked about the naturalness and seeing people's names carved. Well, the graffiti warriors feel the same way. There's been a lot of research to show that people need to get back and reconnect to nature.
Yeah.
And without that, there's more stress in people's life. So don't do things that would impact somebody else's experience with nature, like loud amplified music, destroying natural settings like with graffiti or carving trees.
Yeah, I believe that's absolutely essential to good mental health, is some connectivity to nature. And if we destroy what's our greatest asset that we have here in Utah, I can't imagine our mental health would improve. And so I hope with all the new people who are coming into Utah, all the new residents we have, all the dog owners, that everybody be more cognizant of there is a massive ecology. There's a lot of fragility. And if we're not careful, we can just totally mess it up. And unfortunately, just in the last 5 years of going to Mill Creek, I've definitely seen everything you've talked about just very prominent. Like, people just decide that on the switchback, just going down the Salt Lake Overlook Trail, I'm just going to cut right through, try to find a new shortcut. And then the trail gets eroded, and then you see more and more, the trail widens more and more. You see these little cross-cut areas where people are going through, and then there has to be another Eagle Scout project or something like that, right?
Right. So we did have Eagle Scouts doing that specific part of the trail this year. And then our trails crew goes up there and fixes the switchbacks too.
Yeah.
When it needs to be a little bit more intensive.
Yeah, I even train my dogs to do the whole switchback. Don't like they're inclined to do the shortcut, but
Yeah. And
Yeah.
those cutting of those switchbacks are mostly from the dogs.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, not my dogs. My dogs are awesome, but I know that they're not. They don't leave zero trace because they like to.
Right.
If they see a squirrel, of course they're going to chase it. So that's
Right.
not great.
Yeah. I have dogs too.
Yeah. Oh, they're fun. They're my way of totally connecting with nature and having a great time in it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I think that's great. So I think if anybody listening wants to have more information on this, is the best way, we'll put a bunch of notes in both utahstories.com and in the show notes, but is there also more websites and resources out there for how people can volunteer and things like that?
So we do have a newly formed Friends of the Salt Lake Ranger District group. They just became 501c3. They are putting together their website right now. I'm told every couple days it'll be done in a couple days. So we're just waiting for it to be finalized, but they've already started accepting donations and getting those donations out to people that could use the help, like the graffiti people, to purchase the needed supplies.
Oh, great. So where can people go anywhere right now to get
So I would
hooked up with
recommend
them?
at this time contacting my office at 801-733-2660, and we will get them in touch with the necessary people.
Cool. And then all the volunteer organizations that are out there, we'll get those names from you and try to link up to a bunch of them as well.
Yeah, and the Friends group will have all that listed on their website as well. Cottonwood Canyons Foundation, they're a huge volunteer organization for us, providing wildflower tours, weed pulls, ski with a ranger program. They snowshoe with a ranger. They do a lot of work with us. Silver Lake Visitor Center, they have a couple people up there as well. So they're just an amazing partner. Salt Lake Climbers Alliance is another great partner that we've been working with on the climbing routes and hardening those trails. So if you have a climber that's interested in that, then we can point them to that direction. Tracy Aviary goes out and does bird surveys. Tree Utah, as you mentioned earlier, they plant out thousands of trees every year. And I know I'm going to forget a couple.
Are there any dog organizations where responsible dog owners for wilderness, something like that?
So there is a Friends of Fidos,
Yeah.
but they haven't provided a lot of volunteer activities. I do have a couple of individual dog owners that have done dog cleanups and things like that, in specifically Neff's Canyon and Mill Creek Canyon. But yeah, that would be great if somebody wants to start.
Well, it was. I know that the
Friends
Tanner
group of
Park area, it was deteriorating to the point like 6 or 7 years ago where it was obvious there had to be something done, and it wasn't. Let's just get rid of all the dogs, and they came up with a solution to cordon off those areas, and I think it was a really great plan. And and when responsible dog owners see irresponsible dog owners, I think it's got to be in your best interest to tell them, look, you got to clean up after your dog. You're ruining it for everybody. And so I would hope that, more people do that.
I would agree. Sounds like you're willing to start a group for me.
Maybe so.
That would be great, because I'm seeing Mill Creek has odd and even number days. Odd day is dog day. So odd days, you can have your dog off leash.
Yeah.
Even number days, dogs have to be on leash. And that's throughout the entire canyon. I get about 12% compliance with that rule.
Yeah.
And so when I'm out there, it's a lot of education, explaining to people why they have to have their dogs on leash. It's not just because bikes can come down. We have other visitors that also want to go up there without having dogs jump all over them or something. And then we also have a lot of our maintenance activities occur on even number days, because dogs, when they're off leash and see somebody with a tool, they can be aggressive. And so I've had a couple of my trails people bit by dogs
really?
this year alone.
Oh, man.
So even number days, if they're on a leash, it's less likely to happen.
Yeah, and I think also, if people know, if you've got a dog who really shouldn't be off leash, even if it's an off leash day, don't have your dog off leash. Our old golden retriever was attacked by a dog, and the owner admitted, well, yeah, she gets really aggressive when other dogs run right up to her like your dog did.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, then why would you have her off leash?
Right.
And my golden retriever was attacked, and she knew it could happen. So why would you do that? So
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about your dog, because that is something to consider. Know your dog and know whether or not this would be an area you can go, but should you go?
Yeah.
Right. There's that second question that I don't think people ask.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, well, I think that's about it. We were considering doing a story examining, the problems with graffiti and people camping out in forest areas, and is that a constant problem where people are spending too long of a time in one particular area where they shouldn't be, and they're more like squatting than camping?
Yeah, with the homeless problem that we have in Salt Lake Valley, we definitely have a lot of people in the canyons. Just last week, I was in Mill Creek, and we have a couple people doing that up in Mill Creek. I have, in addition to my no fire within a half mile of the road, I also have no camping within a half mile of a road in any of these canyons. Watershed protection, again, it's our primary reason why we're here. So we don't allow camping unless you're in a designated campsite. So it's just not an area that's appropriate for us to faucet in these canyons. And what do we want to drink?
Yeah. And so in Mill Creek, can you camp more than...
You can't camp in
You
Mill
can't
Creek.
camp at all. Oh, okay.
We don't have any designated sites in Mill Creek.
Oh,
so
got
as
it.
long as you're within a half mile of a road, you can't camp.
But if you're beyond a half mile of a road, you can.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a 7-day stay limit. And there's,
Okay, I was
it's
wondering
the
about
leave
that.
no trace principles. Make sure that you're burying your human waste and picking up everything that you've left. Move every couple of days so you're not destroying the vegetation. Those types of things.
Yeah. I had a cousin who tried to live up City Creek Canyon. I don't think it worked out too well for him.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Somebody's arriving and Scamps is barking. But Becky, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on the Utah Stories Show. If you'd like to be a bigger part of the program, go visit utahstories.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Another way you can be a part of it is you can join us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Those are our 3 social media platforms. We're way more actively involved in YouTube and Instagram than we are any other platforms. And just so you know a little bit about this program, we're into preserving the quality of life we enjoy here in Utah. That pretty much encompasses all of our guests on the program. If that's something you're into as well, then I hope you join us and recommend guests, recommend topics, come with your questions. We're live streaming our episodes every Tuesday at 1:30 on YouTube, so you can join us live. And thanks for being a part of the program. Until next time, this is Richard Markosian signing out. The show's also brought to you by Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef. Premium all-natural grass-fed beef delivered right to your door, free anywhere in the state of Utah. It's an awesome new company, and we love their jerky and their steaks, and everything they do is awesome. Visit Paisleys.com. That is PAIZLEES.com. Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef, always the right choice.